Well, good morning. Thank you all for getting up for the early slot. I've been looking forward to introducing the panel today. I think we've got a very strong lineup, and I'm delighted to be able to introduce the people who you probably know most in many ways. To my left is Michele Centenaro, who's the General Secretary of the European Club Association. We have, probably needs no introduction in this part of the world anyway, but it's Domingos Oliveira from Benfica. We have Stefano Patello, correct, from Juventus. And also Jose Maria Cruz from Sevilla. And I think we've got a very strong lineup because we're going to be talking about the modern club business model, which is something that is very much in vogue at the moment, especially with some of the troubles some clubs in the UK have especially gone through in recent times. Before we start, we're going to hear from Michele, who's going to give us an overview of a European club business model from an ECA perspective. So, thank you very much, Michele.
Thank you. So, good morning, everybody. Can you hear me well? Yes. Are you wake up enough? It's going to be a fantastic presentation, I can tell you. Thank you for your attention. Before we enter into the topic, just 2 words on ECA. Maybe you might have heard about ECA, maybe not. Maybe recently on the press, for the good and for the bad also. We are actually an independent association which represents directly the clubs who regularly participate in European competitions. That's why our main purpose is to safeguard, strengthen, and shape European club football. This is our main job. We have 246 members. We're going to have a new panel right now, and they come from 55 countries. So this already tells you how challenging it is to come to some sort of consensus, so to say. But the good thing about it is that this huge number gives us quite some legitimacy and representativity. So to follow basically what the topic of the day is, we can, through our panel, and we did internal research and surveys, we can give you some sort of universe, what we call club universe, of European clubs according to our panels. And we have done that putting 2 main indicators, which is revenues and wages. So we have done some good mapping with our members or where we are in Europe. So if we start with the first tier, actually we call it tier 4, and it goes down by countries, so from the 55th to 25th, we see we have a number of clubs whose main business model, I would say, is probably youth development. Yes, where else do they get their revenues? Some healthy owners, maybe, some state funds. We see a logo of a club there, Astana, who's probably supported by the club. But, of course, their main business is really professionalize their club and try to develop youth players. Of course, part of their big fund is coming from the participation to European competition. So for those clubs, as well as for this second tier, the revenues from European competition constitute between 80 and 50% of the yearly budget. So it's quite a big number, I would say. That's why for these people, Europe is dramatically important. When you move up to tier 3, we start seeing now some clubs which have a bit more popularity. We see Legia Warsaw, FC Copenhagen, so we start hitting big cities. In this case, their business model is probably the same as before, but to a higher level. Here we start to kick in also some commercial and match days and a little bit of broadcast, probably especially in Poland, which is a 50 million people country, so there is some room from broadcast, domestic broadcast. And you can also see there, we positioned it, part of this tier, a logo which is Celtic Football Club, which is a bit of an anomaly, so to say, because it is one of those clubs with tradition, with history, with what they call fundamentals, so stadium, fans, and actually they are able to deliver a level of revenue a bit higher from the rest. But still, if we move to the tier 2, now we start seeing clubs like Benfica. Domingos is here. You can tell me if what I say is right or not. Again, I think here we're really talking about historical club with a lot of tradition, a lot of history, a lot of sporting results that are a bit, how to say, disadvantaged by the fact their domestic broadcast market is not delivering enough resources to be able to be competitive. So here again, main resource is commercial, match days, and I would say, correct me if I'm wrong, players training and trading. I think this is one important key point. But also for these clubs, the role that the UEFA revenues, so participation to European competition has, is quite important. It can go up to 30-40% in some good seasons. And then we come to the top of the pyramid. And here we actually talking about tier 1. So these are the global brands, so to say. Amongst these global brands, probably on those 3 dots, there's also Juventus. So Stefano, you're also involved. And a little bit lower also Sevilla. So you're also in, but we couldn't portray all of them. So these are clubs that probably have already reached another dimension. And what is actually remarkable here is you see where we were left with tier 3 with Besiktas over there. You see how huge is the gap. And that's what we mean by really club polarization. So there is a number of clubs that has taken the lift and moved completely away. These are really global brands. And where does the revenue stream comes from? Mainly, it's by far from domestic broadcast. It is not a coincidence that these clubs, they all belong to top 5 leagues, which actually brings me to the next slide, which is a comparison of the revenue broadcast between top 5 leagues and the other 50 leagues. Why top 5 and other 50? You will see in a minute. So this was in 2008. It was about 3 billion broadcast of top 5 leagues and 446 million for all the other 50 leagues. Now, more or less 10 years after, 2017, you see how the gap has dramatically increased. So it's natural that the clubs who belong to the top 5 leagues automatically create a huge gap vis-à-vis the rest because they have a domestic source of income which is fundamental. On top of this, of course, they are global brands, so they also develop all their commercial strategies very well. We're really talking top brands. I would just give you another information here on the reference and comparison between top 5 leagues and the rest. Something which came out recently from a study is that, in fact, the top 5 leagues at the moment in aggregate revenues are worth 3 times the revenues of the other 50 leagues. So we see where we are going. So with this in mind, we were now able to, for the simplicity of discussion and also setting the scene, as you asked me, I think we have categorized 3 kind of clubs. So the big clubs, we call it the big clubs, as we said, they want to stay global. Their main ambition is to stay global and even expand. That's their main ambition. And they want to play more relevant games, both at national level and at European level. This is their main ambition. Then we have the so-called medium clubs, which have the ambition and the objective to stay relevant. They want stay in the game. They want to be left out, too far away. They need to be able to develop their brand in Europe. And that's why they also need more European games. And then we have the small clubs that actually, they just need to stay alive. These are the ones that we call, or actually they call themselves the survivors, because their only income basically comes from Europe, and for them, participation to Europe is an existential matter. So this is the landscape, so to say. So what are we going to do with that now? How do we address that? We think, as ECA, we have a duty to actually look at the future. How do we, let's think forward. What do we want? How do we address these issues? Plus, so we think we need, it's our duty to have a longer-term vision, some more of progressive thinking, how things should move on from now. We have to look beyond our finger. So, and to do that, we need to address, as we have seen, the financial distortion created by the top 5 leagues and the club polarization, as we have seen. We also have to address some sign of declining competitiveness, which are very evident, both in European competitions, if we think at group stage of the Champions League, but also in many leagues. So often the games are rather predictable or not necessarily or very obvious. We have to address also what we call an unexploited potential. The market tells us that the top 5 markets are kind of stagnating at the moment, and the media landscape is changing. We don't call TV anymore, we call it screen. We don't call channel anymore, we call it OTT or platform. We are used to, especially the young generation, to a different kind of consumption of the football and sports in general. And football is important, it's the jewel sport for Europe. We cannot let other sports come into it and take our place. And it is our belief that the European competitions, more than the domestic competition, they have some unexploited potential, which would be for the benefit of the whole ecosystem. Last but not least, from a purely sporting concept, we believe there needs to be also more reward to the European performances of some clubs. You remember last year the performances of FC Porto, quarterfinals. Now they had to go through the qualifying rounds and they're out. So all the players gone, had to sell everything, restart the model, no planning, no ability to have some sort of stability. Ajax was also very close to going out, semi-finals of the Champions League. Something is not right there, so we have to address that. So what is, I wouldn't say the solution, but what is our view? We believe that more Europe as a tagline is a necessity. And this goes across all levels of clubs, as we have seen. And we envisage that to implement it through what we call a European platform, through which all clubs can exploit their full potential. It's like looking at when EU was founded. Europe decided that all were part of the same market. So even the smaller ones, they had the opportunity to be part of that same marketplace and platform that would give them the opportunity, if they are good, to exploit them in full. So this is the sort of vision which seems quite simple, but actually can be very effective. And we are all Europeans. Our children travel with Erasmus. They work abroad. We are Europe. So through this European platform, we could deliver more competitive matches and better competitions overall. That means more excitement, more compelling games, higher quality. We could deliver as well a broader marketplace for growth overall, for redistribution, for solidarity, so the whole movement would grow and cascade down, and also allow more stabilities for the clubs who actually need it. And last but not least, a model of a European larger platform would allow also for the smaller clubs to be able to show their talents, to play more regularly in Europe, exercise and expertise European matches on a more regular basis. All of that through a sporting system which is purely based on sporting meritocracy, so everyone has a chance and the best wins on the pitch. And of course, a very important point, keeping then some symbiosis with domestic football, because domestic football is important. It has to be protected, it has to be nurtured. At the same time, though, maybe it's also important to try and give some more reward to European performances to create a link between domestic and European football. So we are really talking about here ecosystem. The whole thing goes together. You cannot do one without looking at the other. And that is the conclusion of my small presentation. Just one line. Overall, we prefer to be progressive, to be innovative, rather than maybe sitting a bit in a conservative and protectionist way. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michele. Thank you. Joe, you sit over there. A bit of a seat swap. That was fascinating, and I know that many of you will have questions around some of that presentation. If we have time at the end of this session, we'll go to that. But I think, more importantly, it'd be quite interesting to hear some of the thoughts on that from some of the people actually running and managing these clubs. I mean, I'll start with Domingos, actually. How important is European club income for you as a club?
Well, for us, it's extremely important because, first of all, we live in a small country. Mm-hmm. So the amount of revenues we can generate internally, it's less than, for example, any one of these clubs from mm-hmm. Sevilla or Juventus. So we depend a lot on European revenues. Just to give you an example, just in terms of the money coming from the Champions League and from Europa League, in the last 10 years, I would say, we have always been in the Champions League. It is close to 25 to 30% immediately. But then you have additional revenue coming from ticketing and coming from sponsors. We have, among our 10 top sponsors, 9 of them are non-Portuguese companies. So Emirates, for example, in the shirts. Mm-hmm. Their exposure depends on how we perform in terms of European matches. So we have to do a lot in order to stay with them, and I can say, of course, Emirates, but I could say Heineken, etc. So it's extremely, extremely important for clubs like Benfica, and I would say for all clubs in subdivision where we are today, subdivision 2, which is the non-top 5, and I would say the additional 9 countries, clubs from the 9 next countries.
Thank you for that. Jose, your club have been hugely successful in Europa League in the very recent past. How do you budget for a place in the latter stages of that tournament now on a regular basis? And if so, how do you do that?
Can you repeat? I'm not sure if I have listened to you.
Sorry. Your club have been hugely successful
yes.
in the Europa League in the recent past. Is this something you now budget for? And if so, how do you do that?
Well, it is true that we have been very successful in the last Europe League competitions. We have not projected to be so successful. It is true that it has been very, very important for us to participate consistently in European competitions. We have been very lucky to compete some years in Champions League, but we always say in Sevilla FC, that Europa League is our competition, is the competition that changed our club, and to some extent changed our life. Why? Because we passed from being a medium-sized team in our domestic competition, not winning any league, winning some cup each 15, 20 years, to start the second year in the recent step of the club, winning the final of the Europa League, winning the next Europa League, and being the only team winning 5 times the Europa League, and the only team winning 3 consecutive times. Then we prefer to participate in Champions League, but we believe that even though it will be good that the distance, the gap between the revenues of one competition and the other, and the communication between the two competitions, some teams passing from Champions League to Europa League, the winner of the Europa League having the chance to participate next season in Champions League, it's very good. And we believe that if you are able to give importance to a competition, you have more chance to win this. We compare with other countries. We always discuss why, for instance, UK teams are not very successful in Europa League. They are success in Champions League. And we always say they don't give enough importance to this competition because they believe that it's a second-level competition, and if you want to win something, you have more chance to do. Then for us has been quite important, not only in terms of revenues, but in terms of being more known worldwide, and to give our supporters the proud to be important in Europe.
Yes, and I think that's a valid point. Like, in many ways, it goes back to the power in the UK of the Premier League and the revenues there. But for Stefano, you're one of the Tier 1 clubs who were on the list we just saw. And is the Premier League, is the Champions League for you a brand extension exercise, or is it about the revenues, or is it a combination of both?
Well, many of the concepts that Domingos mentioned earlier actually still apply to a club like Juventus. It's no secret that we are a listed company, and so our reports are published in full. And if I make reference to the accounts closed at the end of June 2018, the revenues, direct revenues from the Champions League still accounted for around 20% of our total turnover, which is considerable. And also, as Domingos was saying, there are other commercial revenues that are strictly related to the performance of the club in the Champions League. So it's still very relevant. If we make a comparison between Juventus and other clubs that are ahead in the turnover list, actually this is one of the differences. We are still relying on the revenues from the Champions League. And the revenues from the Champions League, of course, are strongly dependent on performance. So there's a sporting risk which is higher than other revenue streamlines. So we are working hard on that, especially to increase to decrease our dependence on the revenues that are more related to the sport performance. But at the same time, we are still relying on that.
And I guess a follow-on question from that, especially as broadcast income has been so important to a lot of the clubs. In the oil industry, they have a saying, we're at peak oil. Do we believe, and I don't know who wants to take this, that we are actually at the peak of the revenue that broadcasters can actually sustainably pay for live football?
Well, this is a very good question, and a lot of people, of course, we are asking our question at many different levels: domestic level, international level, club level. I don't think it's an easy answer because there are many dynamics currently at work in the market. Of course, everybody knows about the shift from free-to-air to pay TV, and this is one of the main drivers that actually in the past has allowed this industry to achieve the targets that we achieved. And also, we all know that fruition and consumption by consumers has changed over time. The new generations actually are consuming the product in a different way, as we did, or even my kid, who is 20, is doing right now. So it's not an easy answer. I don't think we are at the peak, but we have to work hard to stay on top of the new dynamics that are at work, as I said.
Yeah.
And in order to do that, we have to do a lot of research, which is what we are doing at many different levels. And also we have to think about the future we cannot afford to be short-sighted right now. We have to have a medium to long-term vision.
Okay. There's an interesting fact, and I'll put this one to you, Domingos, that in the English Premier League, 11 of the clubs there would make a profit without a single fan going through their turnstiles, i.e. they're not reliant on matchday revenue. Is this a good thing, and is this something you would aspire to at Benfica? And if it is a good thing, why would that be?
Not sure to have understood your question. Can you repeat it?
11
clubs from
Premier
the Premier
League
League
clubs are making money around the game of football rather than from matchday revenues. Is this an objective, and if so, why would that be?
Well, the first objective is to be profitable, okay?
Yeah.
And you have to find the means to do that. In our case, we've been profitable for the last 6 years. On average, I would say that we have generated something between 20 and 30 million euros every year in terms of profitability. The way to achieve that, of course, there's two things. I will not go on the details, but I would say that the most healthy movement is to increase your revenues. Now, if you look at the situation in EPL, which I study for different reasons, there's a lot of clubs. Well, all clubs have so much money coming from TV revenues that some of them do not need to work heavily on the other streams, which is most probably true for the smallest clubs, okay? In our case, the revenues coming from the TV deals generated in Portugal are quite small. So we had in the last years to generate additional revenues outside the TV broadcast. Coming to the question you ask Stefano, I think that, for example, in the Premier League, you're facing most potentially a peak right now, okay? And we have to consider that this will happen in the other markets, which means that you have to find alternatives. And I think that in the near future, we will face a challenge a little bit like the music industry faced until they found new ways of generating revenue. So in our industry and in the TV broadcasters, I think that we will have to work together in order to find alternative ways of generating additional revenues.
Yeah. No, that's a good point, and something I'd put to Stefano. The entertainment and media industries are going through huge transformation and disruption in terms of where technical advances are coming through and how consumers are consuming their products. What are you as a club doing to mirror that, if at all, and take advantage from the revenue streams?
Well, again, it's not an easy answer. What we're doing actually, we're trying to have a comprehensive commercial strategy, addressing all the revenue streamlines, both the old ones and the new ones. And we are trying to, since it's clear there's a move from a very football-oriented, very sport-oriented organization towards a more broader activity where we have, we are turning actually into a media entertainment company in many respects. We're trying to keep the level of engagement of the fans still high, even when there's no match going on. Actually, we are working hard in order to provide content to the fans, even when there's no live content, okay? So, of course, the internet, the web, the digital activities are a perfect fit in order to do that, but probably it's not the only, we shouldn't put all our eggs in one basket. We should still continue to provide very quality games, so keeping the quality level of the team high, having good performance on the pitch, but at the same time, try to engage the fans after the game is over, after the players goes out of the pitch. And also we have to do that on a global scale, because we want we are, and we want to stay relevant on the global scale. In order to do that, we are also increasing our presence, as other clubs have done around the world. We just opened up a branch in the Far East in order to be closer to cultures that are different from ours, that are different from the European culture, in order to have more feedback from those countries, those markets, in order to address specific needs, because you need to be specific. Acting on a global scale, it's not easy. I mean, it's not just one market, many markets, many waves by which consumer link and make a connection to your club. So this has a huge impact on the organization as well, on the number of people working, on the type of people working, on the level of education, on many things.
No, thank you for that. And Sevilla have just opened up an online shop with Amazon. What was the rationale for the club shop? What was the rationale for that?
I have some difficulties in hearing you. You are too far from me.
I'm so sorry.
Okay, can you repeat, sorry?
Your club have opened up an Amazon shop, online shop. What was the rationale for that, as opposed to doing it yourself?
Well, we need. We believe that we need to create more platforms, more alternatives in order to sell our products, and we believe that it is necessary to explore new buyers because in some cases clubs have been very conservative in the way in which they are trying to channel their products to consumers, and we believe that we needed to explore new alternatives, because if we don't innovate in some cases, it is difficult for us to grow and to be more competitive every day. Of course, sometimes you try to do something and you are not totally sure that you will be success. For instance, we have some experience recently in order to check if, for instance, using Amazon as a platform to broadcast some of our friendly matches is a good experience, not in terms of obtaining direct revenues from the match, but in order to have the opportunity to be more known in some markets, even though renouncing to receive money. In this specific case, I'm speaking not merchandising, I'm speaking TV matches. We thought, instead of receiving, say, 100,000 euro from a domestic broadcaster, we prefer that more people worldwide has the opportunity to see our match in a different platform. We need to invest in this kind of ideas, even though you know that in the short term it's not easy to renounce to have revenues. Even though, anyway, I want to change your question and to express a concern. A concern that I have, and I don't know, maybe that is not politically correct, but all the clubs that are present here, Michele as representative of ECA, are focused in obtaining more revenues, being more profitable, more sustainable. But what about giving a lot of money to the players, giving a lot of money to the agents, paying transfer fees for amazing amounts? I don't say that we don't need more money, but I believe that we are in a race every year trying to grow more and more and more in order to pay more money to few people which are not giving more value to our business in the same level that they are receiving the money. This is a concern that we must have. I believe that one of the main success of the Spanish league has been not centralizing the TV, which has been very important, distributing the TV revenues in order to have more teams competitive, but the more relevant point has been financial control of the club, not paying more money that you earn
Yeah.
to be not profitable, but sustainable.
Yeah.
I believe that we need, of course, to think in the future, to explore new alternatives, because everything know that the consumers are changing. We need to think in our business, but what about being more rational in the term of expenses, paying to the artist,
Yeah.
to the intermediaries, as they contribute to the business and no more money.
And do you think there's a danger as clubs become entertainment and media businesses that you're not competing against each other, you're now competing against Netflix, Apple, Amazon, and all of these other entertainment businesses? Domingos, you want to pick that one up?
Well, I believe that football is show business. Okay, we are it's an entertainment business. Although there's a lot of things that we invest that are not part of what people see. For example, in our case, we put a lot of importance in terms of youth development, and the majority of our fans and even the guys who are outside Portugal, they don't see what we do. But coming to what José Maria just mentioned, we are facing a challenge when it comes to these new players coming in the field. So I believe that we will have to work together with them, with Netflix, Amazon, Google, etc. I think that what will be the business in terms of the future will be something that we will have to mix our interest with them. So it's not that we are competing against them, it's not that the TV broadcasters are competing against them, it's that we have to work all together. Because it's a fact that when you see, and we saw this in a recent ECA General Assembly, when you see the brands that today are more relevant compared to what they were 10 years ago, all these guys that you just mentioned, they are in the top 10.
Yeah.
Okay? So it's inevitable that you have to work and to address the fact that they are not the kings in the room, but they are extremely important in the room.
And Stefano, can you see a time when top-tier football, and I was going to ask you, Michaela, I thought it would be unfair, by the way, but you might want to take it later on, would be the Champions League or Europa League or some of the big European leagues would be delivered via a Netflix or an Amazon or a Facebook platform?
No, exactly for the reason that Domingos mentioned, actually. We have to work, everybody has its own business. Our business is to play football, okay? And to provide content, actually. If you want to put it like that, in terms of the media industry, we are content providers, okay? But I mean, and you can see that when you look at Netflix, for instance, and some of the, I mean, I read the articles that are in the press. When you read about that, and you see that they can sometimes struggle with their own business model, you can understand what are the difficulties of a football club. I mean, I have a financial background, so sometimes I use categories from the financial world, and I sometimes say that clubs are to football what banks are for the financial sector, because we are actually taking all the risk on ourselves, on our shoulders. We digest it, okay, and then we produce a content which hopefully is meaningful and entertaining, okay? That's what we do. And actually this fact is what really distinguishes the clubs in the whole football family, and should be taken into account. Sorry. And sometimes it's not taken into account in the way that it will deserve, in my personal opinion. Having said that, of course, there are differences among the clubs, and the presentation from Michele showed that very clearly. And this brings different business models, because, of course, the English Premier League clubs have a certain business model, the top Spanish club has a certain business model. Even Juventus' business model is slightly different. And then you go down the chain, and probably you get to a point where the business model is totally oriented about developing players, but there's nothing wrong in that. I mean, it's just different, okay? There are many organizations in the industry, and the different models are different. But we can live together. Everyone has its own role in the chain, along the chain. And I don't think that, to answer your question, in the end, our competition in terms of clubs will be with the FANG or the big guys in the media industry. We have to work together. Of course, there will be competition among content. This is for sure, because as the Americans say, there's competition for the entertainment dollar, and in the end, time is a scarce resource, and so the consumers will have to decide which content they wanna get, they wanna consume, and football is one of the options for them. And if you look at that in that way, it's different, because for my generation, football was kind of a religion, okay? And it's probably not anymore, especially for the youngsters. It still is for our generation, but it's probably not the case for the youngsters. And so when it's not religious, probably the behavior, the consumer behavior changes. Because when it's religious, you don't ask a lot of questions, you just do that. And you connect with your team because it's automatic, okay?
But that's an interesting point, because a lot of brands could be accused of leveraging the loyalty of fans, and there's very few brands where you'd have that loyalty going from generation to generation, regardless of the quality of the content of that product. Football has that. Is there a responsibility with the clubs, who many of them are part of their communities, to actually maintain a presence regardless of performance within their communities? Domingos, do you want
I can try to address.
Because you're a community.
You know that we have a mixed situation between being a club that belongs to the members,
Yeah.
and then the club owns a company who is a listed company. But coming to the club, just to Benfica, we have today close to 250,000 members, paying members, and they are really the owners of the club.
Yeah.
It is almost a unique situation in Europe. And we have to address these members and the fans, but especially the members, on considering that they are really the owners, okay? They are really the guys who are the construction, or who are in charge of the construction of the club. We manage the club, but they are the ones who support us. It is extremely important to address the community. And we do that on very different ways, but we take care of the members in terms of, first of all, putting a lot of information in them, giving more content to them. We have specific programs around those who have season tickets in the stadium. And we have the Benfica Foundation, which address also the community, not only the Benfiquista community, but also the community outside Benfica. For example, our chairman, our president, is today going to Cape Verde just to address specific social projects in this community. So you have a responsibility, that's for sure. And I think that what I still see, Stefano mentioned that it was a religion maybe in our generation, but I still see it as a religion. I think that the behavior of our fans is very much close to a religion. They come to the stadium no matter what happens. We increase, it's true that we won 5 of the last 6 leagues, but we increased the number of season tickets from less than 20,000 to more than 45,000, no matter what. In fact, we lost the league in 17-18, and we sold much more season tickets. So it's really something that you have to consider, that the community is with you no matter what, and you have to address them.
So as a club, it's interesting because you're doing a lot of work, as we discussed earlier, in North America. So if we take the religion aspect of it, you have your missionaries going out into North America, into China, all of you do, to amplify this. How do you create a loyalty, which in many cases could be generations old, within a fiscal time frame, within a new market? Or is that possible?
Well, let me answer that firstly,
Okay.
and I think that we all have different realities,
Yeah.
okay? We are not expecting to generate loyalty in those markets. And I think that Juventus, a club like Juventus, can address that. Eventually Sevilla, we cannot address that. We don't have the same size as those global clubs that Michele just mentioned before. Okay, there are maybe 10, 12 clubs who generate a lot of money and can have this vision of becoming a global brand that have fans everywhere. We don't have that expectation. So our strategy is not focusing on that. Our strategy is focused on we are already very good in terms of youth development. We have generated some of the most talented players that play today in Europe, those who are still in Benfica, and we expect to retain them, and those who play in, like we mentioned, City, Barcelona, Juventus, etc. So this is something that we can take to those markets, especially the States, and you just mentioned the agreement we did with San Francisco 49ers, but also to China. So it's about taking know-how, but we don't want to take their fans, okay? We have to respect their brands. So instead of saying that Benfica will be a brand that will fight against the local brands in those markets, we just pushing them. It's a little bit like powered by Benfica, but it's up to them to present their brand. So we're not competing against them. Now, the reality from these guys eventually is different.
Domingos, is it a similar model for you internationally? With Sevilla? Sorry.
Stefano,
Stefano, yeah. Is it a similar model for you, both of you, really?
Yes.
Internationally?
So you first.
No, you first.
I really don't have a lot to add to what Domingos said, actually.
Yeah.
What I meant before is that this religious aspect is close to the local. I mean, it's something that relates with the local community or the domestic community much more than the international community, that's for sure, okay? Because that's our heritage, these are our roots, okay? And so Domingos were mentioning participation of fans inside the stadium, for instance, even if the performance maybe is not so good, they show up as well. But of course, this kind of effect is kind of fading when you enlarge your potential consumer fan base on a global scale. And you cannot pretend that someone from Asia or someone from South America, North America, can be so connected and so linked to the club and so close to the club, even if things go wrong or if the content is not just there. So I personally believe that if we move from religion to brand loyalty, well, that's good.
Let me just add something, because Stefano has something very particular in Juventus. You bought Cristiano 2 years ago, as far as I remember, and I think that this movement was not only a movement from the sports side, but it was also about the Cristiano exposure worldwide. And I think that this was a very smart move, because suddenly, I remember discussing this with Andrea Agnelli, suddenly the Juventus brand went top to the roof. It was really amazing.
Well, yeah. Since we're talking about religion, we have a pre-Cristiano era and a post-Cristiano era.
On that one, Stefano, it was one of the questions I was going to ask you later, actually, because it's an absolute point that your Instagram account went to number 3 overnight. The issue will be that his contract may be up in 4 years' time. How will you maintain and engage those fans if he's no longer with you?
Well, that's the issue in the past, but that's why I strongly believe we have to think about long-term, both as a community and individual. But I think that hiring Cristiano was just a moment of discontinuity in the development path. And if you think about that, in the last 8 years, Juventus had 3 great moments of discontinuity, and Cristiano is not the only one. We had the opening of the new stadium, which is no news for an English club, but it's big news for an Italian club. And we were the launch of the new logo. And the only fact that we can talk about a logo, not a crest, testifies of the fact that that was a big moment of discontinuity. It's not because it's the club I work for, but I think that it was a very bold move, and something that was not probably totally understood at the beginning, but now the feedback that we have is that probably is something that will make Juventus in this respect even more with an additional tool to face the future and the future challenges.
Okay. I'm going to bring Michele in now. He's been waiting here patiently. Listening to 3 of them on the stage, and actually we could represent another 5 or 6 leagues in Europe. How do you maintain a balance at the ECA from all the different needs and requirements of your members and keep everybody happy. Sorry.
Next question.
I mean, is it possible?
Yeah, I think this is actually the essence of our association. I
Yeah.
mean, to be good enough to come all together to some sort of consensus agreement. There is a lot of consultation involved, and you know, in nowadays, governance, transparency is very important. So we are really investing as ECA a lot more in this area. So consultation is really a top feature for us, and then this is going to happening also on the last discussion on post 24. We have running a huge consultation, the biggest one ever, and you have to take into account very properly the feedback, and then you have maybe to sort out what's left where everybody can really buy into that. That's why when we came with this vision, with this idea, the tagline was really more Europe, because that was the place where really every single club, from small to big, was able to buy into it and really demanding for it.
Yeah. No, thank you for that. We've got a couple of minutes, and we can probably take 2 or 3 questions. I'm happy to do. Are you happy to do that, gentlemen? Or yeah. So, has anybody got a question? Don't be shy. I can put my glasses on actually. Any questions? Yeah. Tell me your name and where you're from, please.
Reporter for the Agence France Presse, Portugal correspondent. I'd like to ask Domingos Soriano and Seville representative, sorry, I missed your name, being more medium-sized level, can you have a position of principle regarding the post-24 framework, or is it tempting to say, if I'm in, it's a good solution, but it's not a good solution if I'm out? So how can you manage this situation where you are a little bit in between 2 worlds?
You have to be in.
Well, we're always in. Okay, I think that's the first thing. Is not post 24 is not about just Champions League. It's about additional competition, more clubs playing at European level, and the reaction from what we see in ECA and being still part of the ECA board is that there's a strong enthusiasm from the smallest clubs, which see it as a big opportunity to play more European matches. So I think that contrary to what one could think, it's not about the small clubs or those that see themselves as at risk. They see it as an opportunity, much more than anything else. Now, of course, you're addressing the fact that being part of the Champions League or staying in, let's call it, Europa League 1 is a big difference. It's still already like that, okay? And those differences already exist. And difference between big clubs and small clubs, they exist at domestic level and they exist at international level. We would love to have the same amount of revenues than Real Madrid or Bayern Munich or Barcelona or Juventus are generating, but the reality is what we have. So it's much more about, do we agree that the way the competitions are being prepared, the model of the competitions is prepared, is a healthy model? Does it recognizes the meritocracy of those who perform well at European level and domestic level? If the answer is yes, then we are fully committed with the new model, post-24. That's my vision as Benfica, okay?
Jose?
No, I have a very close vision to this. I have as a different concern, and it's something that I need to discuss with Michele and with the chairman of Juventus, chairman of ECA, is, okay, ECA is a representation of clubs which are consistently playing European competitions, But ECA and all of us need to think not only in these clubs that are at present playing European competitions, but these other clubs which are not usually playing European competitions, but they need to compete sometimes, and we need to create a reasonable balance between domestic competitions and European competitions. It is good for many teams to have the opportunity to live their country in a small domestic competition with few revenues from the broadcasters, and to have the opportunity to have more European matches. But what about the problem of the imbalance within a country? If we have every year the same teams of each country participating in European competition, we create a problem for a lot of teams in Europe, especially from small teams, small countries, and we need to think more about this. Another problem is, of course, the gap between the revenues between the first competition, the second competition, and the third competition. We need to think a little bit more about this, because it is a real problem for some clubs preparing a budget to compete in one competition and not to be able to be so success, and then you have the cost, but you have not the revenues. And we need to be consistent and thinking in the European competition, contribute to the healthy of the football, but not create damages, creating the problem for some clubs of being in poor financial situation if they are not so successful one year, or if they are not able to participate one year in European competition. This is a challenge that we have, and it is something that all together we work in this respect.
Thank you. I can see that we're running out of time, so we probably won't have time to take another question. I just wanted to say thank you all for participating in this panel. I guess to summarize, I was just scribbling down some notes there really. We talked about the new income streams and new types of fan engagement that are critical to running of a modern football club. The changes in clubs over the last 5 years especially has been at a huge rate and pace. And more importantly, the ECA has created a framework for organisations and clubs like yourselves to thrive in that place. So I just want to say thank you to you all individually, and I took my glass, I can't see it. So here's Marie, thank you very much. Stefano, thank you very much. Domingos, and also to yourself, Michele, thank you very much. Much appreciated. And thank you all for getting up. Thank you.